In 1998, a little girl vanished from her backyard in a small American town while her mother did laundry. Just minutes after checking on her, the mother found she was gone. For almost 3 years, there were no answers. Then, after heavy rain, cleanup crews working in a flooded swamp made a shocking discovery buried in the mud, a finding that would haunt investigators and expose the most disturbing truth imaginable. The morning sun streamed through Sarah Whitmore's kitchen window, the warm light falling on the counter where she was whisking eggs. The gentle sound filled the quiet house, a house that had been too quiet for 3 years. At 42, Sarah had learned to live with the silence, but mornings were always the hardest. Emma, her daughter, had been an early riser, bouncing into the kitchen with her wild blonde curls, demanding butterfly-shaped pancakes. The shrill ring of the phone shattered her thoughts. Sarah glanced at the clock, 7:23 a.m., too early for a casual call. She hesitated for a moment before picking it up. "Hello, this is Sarah Whitmore." "Yes, this is Detective Carl Morrison from the Pine Ridge Police Department. I'm sorry to call so early, but we need you to come down to Blackwater Swamp." The voice was professional and careful. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. Blackwater Swamp was about 15 miles outside their small Oregon town, a dense wetland that locals avoided. "What is this about, Detective?" "Our volunteer cleanup crews have been working in the flood zones after last week's heavy rains. They found something," he paused. "We believe it might be connected to Emma's case." The bowl slipped from Sarah's hand, eggs splattering across the floor. "You found her?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We found remains. Small remains. I'd rather not discuss the details over the phone, but we need you to come identify some items." Sarah's legs gave out, and she sank onto a kitchen stool, her free hand gripping the counter's edge. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Mrs. Whitmore, I want to prepare you. This will be difficult. Do you have someone who can drive you?" "I'll manage," she replied, her voice stronger than she felt. After hanging up, Sarah stood motionless in her kitchen, eggs still dripping down the cabinet. 3 years of searching, hoping, and jumping every time the phone rang had led to this. She mechanically grabbed Emma's file, a worn manila folder filled with police reports, photos, and newspaper clippings, and her car keys from the hook by the door. The drive to Blackwater Swamp felt endless. Pine Ridge's familiar streets gave way to a rural highway, then to a narrow access road winding through Oregon's dense coastal forest. Sarah had driven this route only once before, during the initial search. The morning mist clung to the trees, and the road was still wet from the recent rains. As she approached the swamp, the sight ahead made her stomach clench. Police cars lined the muddy road, their flashing lights creating an eerie strobe effect in the haze. Crime scene tape cordoned off a large area near the water's edge, and people in protective gear moved purposefully around a central point. Sarah parked behind a forensics van and sat for a moment, gathering her courage. Through her windshield, she saw Detective Morrison, a tall man in his 50s with graying hair, the lead investigator who had worked Emma's case from day one. He spotted her car and began walking toward her. "Sarah," he said, opening her door. His expression was grave but kind. "Thank you for coming. Where is she?" The words came out raw. "This way, but I need to warn you about what you're going to see." Morrison gently guided her toward the taped perimeter, his hand on her elbow. The flooding washed away years of sediment. "A volunteer found it this morning, an old oven, partially buried in the mud." "An oven?" Sarah's mind couldn't process the word. They reached the inner perimeter where the forensics team was working. On a blue tarp sat a vintage appliance, a 1960s model with bright red enamel, still visible beneath layers of rust and mud. The door was sealed shut with some kind of crudely applied industrial adhesive. "Inside we found." Morrison's voice faltered. He gestured to an evidence table where clear bags lay in neat rows. Sarah stepped closer, her eyes focusing on the contents. Small bones, too small, were laid out in anatomical order. But it was the fabric fragments that broke her. Pieces of velvet fused to metal, scorched but still recognizable. The delicate white lace trim was exactly like the collar of Emma's favorite dress. "No," the word came out as a whisper, then a scream. "No!" Sarah's knees buckled. She hit the muddy ground hard, her hands clawing at the earth. That dress, Emma had worn it to her 6th birthday party just 2 months before she vanished. She'd insisted on wearing it constantly, calling it her princess dress. Detective Morrison knelt beside her, his own eyes wet. The forensics team stopped working, giving her a moment of raw grief. The swamp was silent except for Sarah's broken sobs and the distant call of mourning birds, indifferent to human tragedy. As Sarah, still on her knees, struggled to process the scene, a familiar voice cut through the controlled chaos. "Sarah? Oh God, Sarah!" She looked up through tear-blurred eyes to see Mark Whitmore pushing past the outer perimeter tape. Her ex-husband's face showed a mixture of shock and grief, his usually composed features crumbling as he took in the scene. He was still wearing his hardware store uniform, a red vest with Whitmore's hardware embroidered on the chest. "Sir, you can't." A uniformed officer began to intercept him. "That's my daughter." Mark's voice cracked. "I heard on the radio. They said remains at Blackwater Swamp. That's my little girl." Detective Morrison looked between Sarah and Mark, then nodded to the officer. "It's okay. He's Emma's father." Mark rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside Sarah in the mud. Without hesitation, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her against him. "We'll get through this together," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like we always promised we would for Emma." Sarah found herself leaning into his familiar embrace, too shattered to maintain the walls 3 years of divorce had built between them. Mark's plaid shirt smelled of sawdust and coffee, the same scent that had once meant home. Detective Morrison crouched near them, his voice professionally gentle. "I know this is incredibly difficult, but I need to explain what happens next. We'll need to run DNA tests to confirm identification, but given the size of the remains and the dress fragments..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The likelihood is very high that this is Emma." Mark's arm tightened around Sarah. "How long until you know for certain?" "The initial tests will take about 72 hours. The full forensic examination will take longer." Morrison looked between them. "I'm so sorry. I wish I had better news." Mark helped Sarah to her feet, keeping his arm supportively around her waist. "We should go through Emma's case files again," he said, addressing both Sarah and the detective. "Now that there's new evidence, maybe we missed something, some detail that could help you find who did this." Morrison nodded. "That would be helpful. Sometimes fresh eyes on old evidence can reveal connections we didn't see before." Sarah wiped her muddy hands on her jeans, trying to compose herself. "The files are at my house." Her voice sounded distant, disconnected. "I'll follow you there," Mark said quickly. "We can go through everything together." They walked back to their vehicles in silence, Mark helping Sarah navigate the uneven ground. Behind them, the forensics team returned to their grim work, photographing and cataloging every detail of the scene. Sarah sat in her car for several minutes before starting the engine, watching in her rearview mirror as Mark climbed into his pickup truck. The drive back to Pine Ridge passed in a blur. Sarah found herself at her 1970s ranch-style house, the same house where Emma had vanished from the backyard, without remembering the journey. Mark's truck pulled into the driveway behind her. Inside, the house felt suffocating. Every corner held memories of Emma. Her artwork still on the refrigerator, her height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe, her favorite cereal still in the pantry because Sarah couldn't bear to throw it away. "I'll make coffee," Mark said, moving to the kitchen with the ease of someone who had once lived there. Despite 3 years of divorce, he still knew where everything was kept. Sarah mechanically retrieved the case file from the kitchen drawer and spread its contents across the dining room table. Police reports, witness statements, photos, maps marked with search grids, 3 years of desperate searching laid out in neat piles. Mark returned with 2 mugs, setting one near Sarah's hand. "September 15, 1998, he read from the top report, though they both knew every word by heart. "Emma was playing in the backyard while you were doing laundry. I checked on her every 10 to 15 minutes, Sarah recited, the familiar guilt washing over her. "She had her dolls out by the swing set. She was making them have a tea party. At 3:30 p.m. you went to check again, and she was gone," Mark continued. "The back gate was open. I know I latched it. I always latched it." Mark reached across the table and briefly touched her hand. "No one blames you, Sarah. Whoever took her knew what they were doing." He pulled out his own alibi documentation. "I was at the store. 3 employees saw me. Plus, the security cameras showed me at the register until 5:45. Sarah stared at the photos of Emma spread across the table, her daughter's bright smile frozen in time. Mark picked up one photo in particular, Emma in her red velvet dress at her 6th birthday party, chocolate cake smeared on her cheek. "That red dress," he said softly, his finger tracing Emma's outline. "She wanted to wear it everywhere. Remember how she tried to wear it to the grocery store? I had to hide it sometimes just to wash it," Sarah whispered. Whoever took her, Mark said slowly, setting down the photo. They must have been watching. Known our routines, when you did laundry, when the neighborhood would be quiet. Sarah nodded, the same thought that had haunted her for 3 years. But everyone was questioned, every neighbor, every delivery person, everyone who had been near our street. Maybe we need to think differently now, Mark suggested. With this new evidence, maybe there's a pattern we didn't see before. They sat together at the table where they had once shared family dinners, surrounded by the documentation of their worst nightmare, searching for answers in pages they had memorized long ago. After Mark left to give her space, Sarah found herself alone with the case files still spread across the dining table. She tried to focus on the reports, but her mind kept returning to that grotesque image. The red oven on the blue tarp, sealed shut with layers of adhesive. Something about it nagged at her beyond the obvious horror. The color, perhaps, or the style. She'd seen ovens like that before. But where? Sarah picked up her phone and dialed Detective Morrison's direct line. He answered on the second ring. Morrison here. Detective, it's Sarah Whitmore. I need to ask you something about the oven. Of course. What do you need to know? Could you send me photos of it? Close-ups if you have them. Something about it feels familiar. There was a pause. Familiar? How? I don't know exactly. Maybe it's just my mind trying to make connections, but I'd like to study it more carefully. I can email you the preliminary photos we took at the scene. Give me about 10 minutes. Sarah powered up her laptop, a bulky Dell that took forever to boot. While waiting, she cleared a space on the dining table, pushing aside the papers she and Mark had been reviewing. The email notification chimed, and she opened Morrison's message to find 6 high-resolution photographs. The oven filled her screen in vivid detail. Despite the mud and rust, the distinctive cherry red enamel was still vibrant in places. The chrome handles were Art Deco in style, with elegant curves that marked it as a premium model from decades past. She zoomed in on the manufacturer's plate. Westinghouse, though the model number was partially obscured by corrosion. Sarah printed the photos, the colors coming out slightly off but clear enough. She studied them spread across the table, that nagging familiarity still tugging at her. The red was so specific, not fire engine red or burgundy, but something in between, almost a candy apple tone. Making a decision, she grabbed the photos and her purse. There were several appliance stores in Pine Ridge, including vintage specialty shops. Her first stop was Modern Appliance on Main Street. The young salesman looked at the photos with polite interest, but shook his head. That's way before my time, ma'am. Maybe try Retro Kitchen down on Oak. Retro Kitchen's owner, a woman in her 40s, recognized the style but not the specific model. Definitely 1960s, she said, examining the photos under a magnifying glass. That red was popular for a few years, but I deal mostly in 50s pieces. You might want to check with Harold at Handy's. Handy's Appliance Repair was a narrow storefront on the edge of town. The kind of place that had been there forever and fixed everything from toasters to washing machines. The bell above the door chimed as Sarah entered, the scent of motor oil and old metal filling her nostrils. Harold Hansen looked up from a disassembled mixer on his workbench. He was well into his 70s with thick glasses and hands that spoke of a lifetime of repair work. Help you, miss? Sarah approached with the photos. I'm hoping you might recognize this oven model. Harold wiped his hands on a rag and accepted the pictures, holding them under his bench light. His face changed immediately, eyebrows rising with recognition. Well, I'll be. That's a 1964 Westinghouse Gourmet Series. See those handles? Dead giveaway. They only made that particular red from 64 to 67. Called it Candy Apple Deluxe. He looked at her over his glasses. Don't see many of those anymore. Where'd you come across this one? Sarah's throat tightened. It's part of a police investigation. Harold's expression sobered. I see. He studied the photos again, then looked up sharply. You know, it's a funny thing. I actually sold one just like this maybe 3.5 years ago. Don't get many calls for vintage ovens, so it stuck in my mind. Sarah's heart began to race. Do you remember when exactly? Let me check. Harold moved to a shelf lined with old ledgers, running his finger along the spines until he found the one for 1998. He flipped through pages covered in his careful handwriting. Here we go. April 18th, 1998. Westinghouse Gourmet Series Candy Apple Deluxe. Cash sale, $450. 5 months before Emma vanished. Sarah gripped the edge of the counter. Do you remember who bought it? Cash sale, so no name required back then. But I remember the fellow. Middle-aged, very particular about wanting that exact color. Said it would match his kitchen perfectly. Harold adjusted his glasses, thinking. What struck me as odd was he asked all sorts of technical questions. What temperature it could reach, how well it retained heat, interior dimensions. Most folks buying vintage pieces just want them for decoration or light use. Can you describe him? Average height, brown hair, maybe 40-ish. Nothing particularly memorable, except how specific he was about the color and those strange questions. He even asked if the door sealed tightly. Sarah's hands trembled as she photographed the ledger entry on her phone. Thank you, Harold. This is very helpful. Hope it helps with whatever you're investigating, Harold said, returning to his workbench. Sarah sat in her car outside Harold's and immediately called Detective Morrison. He listened without interrupting as she relayed Harold's information. Interesting timing, Morrison said when she finished. But Sarah, you have to understand, thousands of people own vintage appliances. This could be purely coincidental. Coincidental? A man asking about heat retention and door seals? Sarah's frustration bled through. Doesn't that seem significant? I'm not dismissing it. We'll add it to the file and cross-reference appliance sales with our suspect lists. But without a name or a better description, it's not enough to go on. Sarah knew he was right, but the timing unsettled her deeply. Someone had bought that exact model of oven 5 months before Emma vanished. Someone who cared about temperature and tight seals. The implications made her stomach turn. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat at her kitchen table staring at the photos of the ledger entry on her phone. April 18, 1998. The date seemed to pulse with significance, even if Detective Morrison didn't see it that way. She felt Mark should know about this development. Whatever their differences, he was still Emma's father and deserved to be kept informed. She dialed his cell number, listening to it ring once, twice, 3 times before he picked up. Hello? Mark sounded slightly out of breath, as if he'd been running. Mark, it's me. I'm sorry to bother you. Sarah, no, it's fine. Are you okay? Did something happen? I found out something about the oven. I visited some appliance stores with photos, and this vintage repair shop owner remembered selling that exact model in April 1998, 5 months before Emma. She heard Mark's breathing on the other end, then a slight echo as he shifted the phone. April 1998. That's quite a coincidence. That's what I thought. The buyer paid cash, asked strange questions about temperature and how well the door sealed. Sarah, Mark's voice was gentle but skeptical. Probably dozens of people bought similar ovens around that time. Vintage appliances were trending. Remember that whole retro kitchen movement? His voice sounded oddly distant, with a hollow quality that made Sarah wonder about his location. Where are you? You sound like you're in a cave or something. A pause. I'm at the cabin. The old place up at Deer Lake. After this morning, I needed to get away from town for a bit. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. The cabin? I thought you sold that during the divorce. I was going to, Mark said quickly. Had it listed and everything, but when it came time to sign the papers, I just couldn't. Too many memories, all those summers with Emma. Sarah fell silent. She distinctly remembered him promising to sell it, and her relief at not having to fight over the property. The cabin held too many family memories, teaching Emma to swim off the dock, roasting marshmallows by the outdoor fire pit, the 3 of them cuddled in the loft during thunderstorms. Sarah, you still there? Yeah, I'm here. Listen, Mark's voice brightened, taking on an almost eager quality. Why don't you come up? I know today's been hell, and if you need to talk more about these findings, about Emma, about anything, I'm here. We're both dealing with this, and maybe we shouldn't be doing it alone. I don't know, Mark. I was just about to start dinner anyway. Got steaks defrosting. I hate eating alone, especially on a day like this. I could drive back down and pick you up. It's only 40 minutes. Sarah looked around her empty kitchen at the case files still scattered on the dining table, at the silence that pressed in from all sides. Maybe he was right. Maybe being alone with her thoughts wasn't helpful right now. Okay, she heard herself say. If you're sure it's not too much trouble. No trouble at all. I'll be there in 45 minutes. And Sarah will figure this out. Whatever happened to our baby girl, we'll make sure she gets justice. After hanging up, Sarah wandered into Emma's room. She'd kept it exactly as it was the day Emma disappeared. The unicorn comforter smoothed over the twin bed, stuffed animals arranged just so, crayon drawings taped to the pink walls. She sat on the edge of the bed, picking up Emma's favorite teddy bear, breathing in the faint scent that still clung to it. The cabin. She hadn't thought about it in months, had pushed those memories into a locked box in her mind. They'd bought it the year Emma was born, a rustic but charming place where they could escape Mark's demanding work schedule. Those early years had been good. Mark seemed to relax there, became the father Emma deserved. He taught her to fish with infinite patience, built her a fairy house in the woods, and read her stories by the fireplace. But as his hardware business grew, the cabin trips became less frequent. Work always interfered. Emma would pack her little suitcase and wait by the door, only to have Mark call and cancel. Next weekend, Princess, he'd promise. But next weekend never seemed to come. Sarah fingered the bear's worn fur, remembering the fight that finally ended their marriage. Emma's 5th birthday party. Mark had promised to leave work early to be there for the cake. Instead, he'd arrived after all the guests had gone, Emma asleep on the couch in her party dress, dried tears on her cheeks. "Why doesn't Daddy love me?" she'd asked earlier, and Sarah had no good answer. The divorce had been swift and relatively civil. Mark didn't fight for custody. He knew his work schedule made it impossible. He'd agreed to sell the cabin, or so she'd thought. Now she wondered why he'd kept it. Sentiment? Stubbornness? Or just another promise he'd broken? A horn honked outside. Sarah looked out Emma's window to see Mark's pickup in the driveway. She placed the teddy bear back on the bed, grabbed her purse, and locked the house behind her. Mark stepped out to open the passenger door for her, a gesture from their early dating days. He looked tired, stress lines deeper around his eyes, but he managed a small smile. "Thanks for coming," he said as she climbed in. "I know things are complicated between us, but today we need to be Emma's parents first." Sarah nodded, buckling her seatbelt. As they pulled away from the house, she noticed Mark's hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, a nervous energy radiating from him. She attributed it to the day's emotional trauma. They were both barely holding it together. The truck smelled of pine air freshener and coffee with something else underneath, a chemical smell she couldn't quite place. Mark turned on the radio, finding a classic rock station and filling the space where conversation should be. "The cabin's in good shape," he offered as they left Pine Ridge behind. "I've been fixing it up on weekends. Helps me think, working with my hands." Sarah watched the familiar landmarks pass by, each one laden with memories of happier times when they were a family, when Emma was alive and safe, and their biggest worry was which bedtime story to read. The drive to the cabin took them away from Pine Ridge's suburban streets and into the dense Oregon wilderness. Mark navigated the winding forest roads with practiced ease, the truck's headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Tall Douglas firs pressed in on both sides, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out the fading daylight. "Remember the first time we brought Emma up here?" Mark said, his voice softer than it had been all day. She was only 3, kept asking if bears lived in the trees. Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling slightly. "She made you check under the cabin for bear caves." "With a flashlight and everything," Mark chuckled. "And then she decided she wanted to be friends with any bears we found. She wanted to keep it as a pet," Sarah added, surprising herself by engaging in the conversation. After the morning's horror, talking about happy memories felt both painful and necessary. "So I had to explain catch and release while she gave the fish a name and a full backstory," Mark said. "Princess Bubbles, wasn't it? Princess Bubbles the Third. Apparently, there had been 2 previous fish royalty we didn't know about." They drove in companionable silence for a few minutes, winding higher into the hills. Sarah gazed out at the familiar landmarks, the old ranger station now abandoned, the turnoff for the hiking trail where Emma had collected pine cones, the wooden bridge over Cedar Creek where they'd played poo sticks. "I'm glad you kept the cabin," Sarah heard herself saying. "I know I was angry during the divorce, but these memories matter." Mark glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "It's the only place that still feels like she's alive, like she might come running through the door any minute with a jar full of salamanders." As they turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to the cabin, Sarah's chest tightened with anticipation and dread. The headlights swept across the familiar structure, a modest A-frame with a wraparound deck nestled among towering pines. To her surprise, the cabin looked well-maintained, even improved. The deck had been re-stained, the windows replaced with newer models, and flower boxes hung from the railings, though empty now in late fall. "You've really kept it up," she observed as Mark parked beside the cabin. "Like I said, I'm here most weekends." He turned off the engine. "Started as just maintenance, but then I kinda got carried away." New roof last year, updated the kitchen. He trailed off, perhaps realizing he was rambling. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine wood and lemon cleaning products. Mark flicked on the lights, illuminating a space that was both achingly familiar and subtly different. The furniture was the same, the overstuffed couch where they'd watched movies, the rustic dining table Mark had built himself, but everything seemed freshly cleaned and organized. "Make yourself at home," Mark said, heading to the kitchen. "I'll get dinner started. Steaks okay?" "Sure," Sarah replied absently, already drawn to explore the space. She ran her fingers along the bookshelf, her heart clenching at the sight of Emma's picture books, still lined up on the bottom shelf. Goodnight Moon, Where the Wild Things Are, The Velveteen Rabbit, all their bedtime favorites. On the wall, Emma's tiny fishing rod hung on the same wooden pegs, a child-sized life jacket beside it. The living room walls displayed photos she remembered. Their family at the lake, Emma's first camping trip, the three of them on the deck during a spectacular sunset. But there were also newer additions, photos of Emma she recognized from their house, ones Mark must have copied and framed after the divorce. "Bathroom's where it always was," Mark called from the kitchen. "Though I updated the fixtures." Sarah walked down the short hallway, memories flooding back with each step. The bathroom was indeed updated with new tiles and modern fixtures, but the clawfoot tub Emma had loved remained. Sarah used the facilities and washed her hands, trying to compose herself for dinner. The garage entrance was just past the bathroom. Sarah pushed open the door, intending to just glance at Mark's weekend project space. The garage smelled of motor oil and sawdust, tools neatly arranged on pegboard walls. But it was the large cardboard box in the corner that made her freeze. Westinghouse. The brand name was printed in bold letters across the carton. Sarah's legs turned to jelly as she stepped closer, her breath coming in short gasps. The model number was visible on the side, GS 1964. The same model from Harold's ledger. The same as the oven in the swamp. But this box looked new, crisp edges and unfaded printing, not 23 years old. Not from April 1998. Sarah's vision blurred. She reached out to steady herself against Mark's workbench, knocking over a row of screwdrivers with a metallic clatter. "Sarah?" Mark appeared in the doorway instantly, concern etched on his face. "What's wrong?" She pointed at the box with a trembling hand, unable to form words. Her mind kept seeing that other oven, sealed with adhesive, knowing Emma had been inside. The garage seemed to spin around her. "Oh, Jesus," Mark said, understanding immediately. He rushed to her side, guiding her to sit on a plastic crate. "I'm so sorry. After this morning, seeing any oven must be. God, I should have moved that." Sarah gasped for air, feeling like she was drowning. It's the same model." "Hey, breathe with me." Mark knelt in front of her, taking her hand. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. That's it. Why do you have that?" she managed between gulps of air. "My kitchen oven broke last month," Mark explained, rubbing her back in soothing circles. This was the only model that would fit the old space. "I haven't had time to install it yet." He looked genuinely distressed. "I'm so sorry. I didn't even think about how seeing that would affect you after today." Sarah forced herself to focus on breathing, on the solid feel of the crate beneath her, on Mark's familiar presence. It was just a coincidence. Lots of people had Westinghouse ovens. The fact that Mark had bought the same model meant nothing. She was seeing connections where none existed, her traumatized mind making patterns out of random events. Her breathing gradually slowed. As her vision cleared, she noticed the stack of beer six-packs against the far wall. At least a dozen cases of Coors. "Planning quite a party?" she asked weakly, desperate to think about anything except ovens. Mark followed her gaze and gave a nervous laugh. "Oh, that? Some fishing buddies are coming up next weekend. You know how guys are. I probably overbought, but better too much than running out." He helped her to her feet, keeping a supportive arm around her waist. "Come on, let's get you inside. You should lie down while I finish dinner. This day has been too much for both of us." Sarah let him guide her back through the cabin to the couch, where she sank into the familiar cushions. Mark brought her a glass of water and a blanket, fussing over her with a tenderness that reminded her of better times. "Rest," he said softly. "I'll call you when dinner's ready." During dinner, Sarah picked at her steak while Mark worked his way through his second beer before the meal was even half finished. The dining table, the same one where they'd shared countless family meals, now felt like a barrier between them rather than a gathering place. Mark had grilled the steaks perfectly medium rare, just how she liked them, but Sarah could barely taste the food. "We should talk about what happens next," Sarah ventured, setting down her fork. "Detective Morrison said the DNA results will take 72 hours, but we could start pushing for a more thorough investigation. Maybe hire a private investigator to look into who bought ovens around that time." "You know what I can't stop thinking about?" Mark interrupted, draining his beer and immediately reaching for another from the six-pack he'd placed on the table. "How hard I worked for this family. 60, 70 hours a week sometimes, building that business from nothing." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "Mark, that's not what we should be focusing on right now." "And for what?" He popped the cap off his third beer with more force than necessary. "So you could divorce me the minute things got tough." "Things were tough for years," Sarah said quietly. "You were never home. Emma barely saw you. I was providing for my family." Mark's voice rose. Then he seemed to catch himself, taking a long pull from his beer. "But that wasn't enough for you, was it? 6 months, Sarah. 6 fucking months after the divorce was final, and you were already dating." Sarah set her water glass down carefully. "We were separated for a year before that, Mark. The marriage was over long before the papers were signed." He waved her words away dismissively, his movements becoming looser as the alcohol took effect. "Separated, still married in God's eyes. In Emma's eyes." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I saw you at Romano's with him. Our place, Sarah, the place I took you for our anniversary, where we celebrated Emma's first day of school." A shiver of dread crept down Sarah's spine. "You were watching me?" "I happened to be driving by," Mark said, but his gaze darted away. February 14th, Valentine's Day. The blue dress she'd worn, a Christmas gift from him 3 years prior, was a detail too specific for a random sighting. Her unease deepened. "Mark, have you been following me?" He ignored the question, downing his beer and reaching for another. His fourth? Fifth? She'd lost count. "You look so happy," laughing at his jokes, letting him hold your hand across the table like Emma, and I never existed. "I need to call Detective Morrison," Sarah said, standing abruptly. "Let him know where I am. See if there are any updates." She pulled out her cell phone, but the screen showed no signal. They were too deep in the mountains. "Landline?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Disconnected it months ago," Mark said, not looking up. "Too expensive for a weekend place. Nobody to call anyway." Sarah's heart pounded. They were 40 minutes from town. No cell service, no landline, and Mark was drinking heavily with his truck as the only vehicle. She moved toward the living room, trying to appear casual. "Where are you going?" Mark's voice had an edge. "Just stretching my legs. It's been a long day." "Sit down." It was an order, not a request. "We're not done talking." Sarah reluctantly returned to her chair, keenly aware of their isolation. Mark's face was flushed with alcohol, his eyes taking on a glassy quality she remembered from the worst days of their marriage. "Emma was the only good thing in my life," he slurred slightly. "My perfect little girl, and you took her away." "Mark, the divorce had nothing to do with Emma's disappearance." His laugh was cold and humorless. "You have no idea about cause and effect, do you? How one thing leads to another, like dominoes falling." He stood abruptly, swaying, and moved toward the kitchen for another beer. Sarah seized her chance, heading quickly for the door. She'd walk to town if she had to, flag down a car, anything to escape this increasingly unstable situation. But Mark was faster than his intoxication suggested. He intercepted her at the door, blocking her exit. "Going somewhere?" His voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I want to go home," Sarah said firmly, though her voice shook. "You're drunk and you're scaring me." "Scaring you?" He let out that same cold laugh. "You want to know what's scary, Sarah? Watching your ex-wife replace you like you never mattered. Watching her laugh and smile while your daughter asks every day why mommy doesn't love us anymore." "Let me leave, Mark." Sarah tried to sidestep him, but he grabbed her arm, his grip painful. "You want to know about coincidences?" His mask finally slipped completely, revealing something in his eyes that made Sarah's stomach lurch. Not just anger, but a cold, dark calculation. "That oven in my garage. I bought it last month to replace the one I put Emma in." The words didn't make sense at first. Sarah's mind refused to process them. "What? Couldn't have an empty space in my kitchen," Mark continued, his grip tightening. "People would notice, ask questions. Where's your oven, Mark? Why is there a gap in your counter?" "No," the word came out as a whisper. "No, you were at work. The cameras." "I was at work when she disappeared from the yard," Mark agreed. "But she didn't disappear, did she?" "Not really. I kept her down there for 3 years while you were out dating, replacing us." Sarah's legs gave out, but Mark's grip held her upright. "You're lying," she gasped. "You're drunk and cruel and lying. The basement. Sarah, she was in this basement right below us. The whole time you were filing for divorce, the whole time you were moving on with your life." Sarah tried to scream, but Mark clamped his hand over her mouth. She bit down hard, tasting blood, and he cursed but didn't let go. Instead, he dragged her toward the basement door, her feet scrambling for purchase on the wooden floor. "Time you saw where your daughter really was," he snarled, yanking open the basement door. "While you were playing happy families with someone new." With a violent shove, he sent her tumbling down the wooden stairs into the darkness below. In the basement, Sarah landed hard on the concrete floor, pain shooting through her hip and elbow. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light from a single overhead bulb, the room came into horrifying focus. A small concrete room, maybe 10 by 12 feet, painted a faded pink. A child's cot with princess sheets sat against one wall. On a small rug were children's books, school workbooks, and a stack of notebooks filled with a child's evolving handwriting. Toys for a 6 to 9-year-old girl lined wooden shelves, dolls with handmade clothes, art supplies, a small electronic keyboard. Sarah's heart shattered as the truth crashed over her. Emma had lived here. Her baby had been here the whole time. Mark descended the stairs slowly, gripping the railing for balance. Despite his intoxication, he positioned himself to block any escape route. "Welcome to Emma's home away from home," he said, a mixture of pride and bitterness in his voice. 3 years, Sarah. 3 years she lived right here while you were filing papers, going on dates, replacing us. Sarah pushed herself up, her entire body trembling. "How? You were at work when she disappeared. The cameras proved I was at work at 3:30 p.m. on September 15th, Mark interrupted, leaning against the wall. "They didn't show me taking my lunch break at noon, driving home, waiting in the garage. I knew your schedule better than you did. Laundry day. You always started a load right after lunch. Stayed inside for at least 30 minutes for the wash cycle." Sarah's mind reeled, trying to reconcile this monster with the man she'd married, who'd held their daughter in the delivery room, who'd cried at Emma's first steps. "I'd been planning since the day you filed those papers," Mark continued, his words flowing like poison. "Built this room over weekends when I said I was at the cabin. Soundproofed the walls, installed the ventilation system, told Emma I was building her a surprise playroom." He gestured around the space with drunken expansiveness. "The day I took her, I told her Mommy didn't want us anymore. Said Mommy had decided she only wanted one person in her life, and she didn't choose us." "You're a monster," Sarah whispered. "I'm a father who refused to lose his daughter," Mark shouted, then swayed, catching himself against the wall. "I homeschooled her down here. Taught her reading, math, science. We had a routine. Breakfast at 8, lessons until noon, lunch, then playtime. I was the father you always said I wasn't. Present, involved, dedicated. You kidnapped her. You imprisoned her. I saved her from a broken home." Mark's face contorted with rage and pain. "But she never stopped asking for you. Every single day. When can I see Mommy? I want to go home." I told her this was home now, but she was stubborn just like you. Sarah noticed a crude calendar on the wall, days marked off in crayon. 3 years of crossed-off days. "At first, she tried to run whenever I opened the door," Mark continued, his voice becoming almost conversational. "So I had to be careful, keep the basement door locked from outside. But she got clever as she got older. Started hiding behind the door, trying to squeeze past me. By the time she turned 9, she was getting too smart, too strong." His voice cracked, and Sarah saw tears mixing with the alcoholic flush on his face. "She started threatening to hurt herself if I didn't take her home. Said she'd stop eating. Said she'd find ways to make me sorry. My little girl, my sweet Emma, talking about hurting herself because she wanted to leave me. Because you were keeping her prisoner," Sarah screamed. "Because you poisoned her against me," Mark roared back. "Even down here, even after 3 years, she loved you more. It was always Mommy this and Mommy that, and Mommy would let me, and Mommy's looking for me." He stumbled to a small refrigerator, pulling out another beer. Sarah's eyes frantically searched for another exit, a weapon, anything. "I always knew how it would have to end if she didn't accept our new life," Mark said, his voice dropping to something almost gentle. "Part of me hoped, but deep down I knew." "What did you do?" Sarah's voice was barely audible. "It was a Thursday. She'd been particularly defiant that week, screaming whenever I came down, throwing her books at me. I'd been drinking more. The stress, you understand?" He took a long pull from his beer. "That morning, she looked me right in the eye and said, 'I hate you.' Mommy will find me, and you'll go to jail forever. Mark's hand shook. I made her favorite juice. Apple with just a little bit of grape mixed in. Put the sedatives in it, enough to make her sleep. She drank it during lunch. Started getting drowsy during our reading time. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, nails cutting into her palms. I told her there were monsters outside, bad people who wanted to hurt us. Told her she needed to hide in the special hiding place, the oven. She was so sleepy, so trusting even then. Climbed right in with her stuffed rabbit. Stop, Sarah begged, but Mark continued relentlessly. I turned the heat up slowly, put a chair against the door so she couldn't push it open if she woke up. She never woke up, Sarah. The sedatives made sure of that. Carbon monoxide got her before the heat. Sarah doubled over, retching, the full horror of her daughter's final moments crashing over her. I kept her in there for hours, making sure, Mark said clinically. Then I sealed it up with adhesive, drove out to the swamp at night, picked the deepest part where I knew it would sink. Came back, cleaned the kitchen, installed the new oven I'd bought in April. Perfect crime. Except for you. Except for me, Sarah gasped through her tears. I wanted you to suffer like I did. Wanted you to know she died in fear and pain, burned and destroyed. Like how I felt watching you laugh with another man at Romano's, our place, while our daughter was right here under this roof, waiting for Mommy, who chose dating over finding her. Mark turned toward the corner where cases of beer were stacked against the wall. Need another drink to tell you the rest? In that moment, as he turned his back, Sarah saw it, a hammer on the nearby workbench within reach. Without thought, driven by pure survival and a rage she didn't know she possessed, she lunged for it. The weight felt solid in her hand as she swung with all her strength, connecting with the back of Mark's skull with a sickening crack. He dropped instantly, a beer bottle shattering on the concrete, foam mixing with the blood pooling beneath his head. Sarah didn't check if he was breathing. She didn't care. She scrambled over his prone body and up the stairs, her body moving on pure adrenaline. His truck keys were on the kitchen counter. She grabbed them with shaking hands and ran outside. The truck started on the first try. Sarah threw it in reverse, tires spinning on the dirt drive, then shifted to drive and floored it. Tree branches scraped the sides as she took the narrow road too fast, desperate to get away, to get help, to get justice for Emma. She drove frantically down the mountain road, taking curves at dangerous speeds, checking the rearview mirror obsessively, though she knew Mark couldn't follow. 10 minutes down the mountain, her phone finally showed one bar of signal. She pulled over, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to dial 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Sarah Whitmore. I'm on Mountain Road near Deer Lake. My ex-husband, Mark Whitmore, just confessed to murdering our daughter, Emma. He kept her in his basement for 3 years before killing her. He's at the cabin, 2847 Deer Lake Road. I hit him with a hammer. I don't know if he's alive. Please send help. Please. Ma'am, slow down. Are you safe right now? I'm in his truck on the side of the road. He killed my baby. He kept her in the basement, and then he put her in an oven. Sarah broke down completely, unable to continue. We're dispatching units to both locations now. Ma'am, stay on the line with me. Are you injured? Through her sobs, Sarah managed to give the dispatcher the crucial details. Mark's confession, the basement prison, the location of the cabin. She stayed on the line as instructed, sitting in the truck on the dark mountain road, finally knowing the truth that would haunt her forever. Police units arrived at the cabin within 20 minutes of Sarah's call, their sirens echoing through the mountain darkness. The first officers found Mark unconscious in the basement, blood pooling beneath his head from a severe wound. Paramedics worked to stabilize him, while crime scene investigators began documenting the horror of Emma's prison. The pink concrete walls, the princess sheets, the calendar with 3 years of crossed-off days. At the Pine Ridge Police Station, Sarah sat in an interview room wrapped in a blanket, though she couldn't stop shaking. Detective Morrison sat across from her, his weathered face showing the strain of the revelations. Take your time, he said gently. I know this is impossibly difficult, but we need every detail. Sarah recounted everything. The dinner, Mark's drinking, his escalating aggression, and finally his terrible confession. Her voice broke repeatedly, but she forced herself to continue, to speak Emma's truth into the official record. He said he kept her for 3 years, she whispered. 3 years? While I searched, while I begged you to find her, she was right there. Through the interview room's window, she could see increased activity in the station. Officers coming and going, evidence bags being logged, the controlled chaos of a major case breaking open. Sarah, I need to step out for a moment, Detective Morrison said after 2 hours. Mark's conscious and talking. I'll update you as soon as I can. Alone in the room, Sarah stared at her hands, the same hands that had pushed Emma on the swings, braided her hair, held her during thunderstorms. The same hands that had swung the hammer to save her own life. Detective Morrison returned an hour later, his expression grim. He's confessing to everything. We've got it all on tape. He sat down heavily, opening a notebook. According to Mark, his drinking started escalating when your marriage began deteriorating. He said he used alcohol to cope with what he called your constant complaints about his work hours after you filed for divorce. His consumption increased dramatically, a 12-pack or more daily. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the smell of beer on his breath during their final months together. He admits to stalking you after the separation, Morrison continued. We found journals at the cabin documenting your movements, your daily routines, who you talked to. Photos of you taken without your knowledge. The entries become increasingly erratic and hostile as his alcoholism worsened. The restaurant, Sarah said quietly. He mentioned seeing me at Romano's. Morrison nodded. February 14th, 1999. You were there with David Carlson from your book club. Mark wrote 10 pages about that night. He considered it, and I'm quoting here, the ultimate betrayal of our family. He said, seeing you at Emma's favorite restaurant with another man was when he decided you needed to be punished. Sarah's stomach turned. He planned it all methodically. He built the basement room over a period of months, telling people he was renovating the cabin, soundproofed the walls, installed locks that could only be opened from outside. During his visitation weekends with Emma, he groomed her to trust him completely, told her he was preparing a special surprise. Morrison flipped pages. The kidnapping itself was carefully timed. He knew you did laundry every Monday after lunch, that you'd be inside for at least 30 minutes. He took his lunch break, drove home, waited in the garage. When Emma came near the back gate, he called her over, told her mommy said she could come for a special daddy-daughter day. She went willingly, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. She trusted him. He drove her straight to the cabin, told her you didn't want them anymore, that you'd chosen a new life without them. He kept her in that basement for exactly 3 years, homeschooling her, controlling every aspect of her life. The beer cans we found, hundreds of them throughout the cabin, indicate he was drinking constantly during those years. Morrison paused, clearly struggling with the next part. He says Emma never stopped asking for you, never stopped trying to escape. As she got older and stronger, he knew he was losing control. The end came when she was 9. She'd become defiant, threatening to hurt herself if he didn't let her go home. He gave her sedatives and apple juice, Sarah whispered. The medical examiner has confirmed cause of death as carbon monoxide poisoning. The sedatives ensured she was unconscious. She didn't suffer, Sarah. That's the one mercy in all this. Sarah nodded, unable to speak. We found his research on his computer, Morrison continued. Searches about body disposal, about psychological torture. He wanted the oven specifically, because he knew how the discovery would affect you. He wrote about wanting you to picture her final moments, to suffer as he believed he was suffering. What charges? Sarah managed to ask. Kidnapping, false imprisonment, murder in the first degree. With his confession and the physical evidence,